So thank you for all that have joined us tonight. When I first booked this in, I didn't envisage that I'd be sitting in my bedroom at home in such conditions. But there we go. We roll with the punches when we are property investors, don't we? So definitely some different times that have been forced upon us in the last month or so. We'll talk about that. We weren't going to talk about it, but we can chat a little bit about that as well, along with what we had as our original topic, which is more of a long-term wealth plan and where the hell do we start with all of that sort of stuff. So I'll try and make that as informative as we can and maybe take some action steps away from it as well, knowing that everyone's case is different. Everyone's starting from a different point, everyone's going to a different point, and we just need to adjust it to our circumstances. So main thing is for tonight that if you've got any questions, you feel free to yell them out or just jump into the group chat and type it in there. And because no doubt if someone's thinking it, if someone's asking it. Is that the right way? No, other way around. Someone's thinking it, the other person's asking it. Whatever that is. All right, so has anyone got anything that they specifically want to ask first and foremost before we kick it off? Is there anything that they want to cover? It's a reasonably open, transparent type session that we can have a bit of a yarn about, but also want to maximise your time. No, not at the moment. That's cool. So we'll start with the current state of affairs. Now, for some of you that have been investing for a while, you know that you may have been through a downturn already in some way, shape or form. Now, the main one was probably GFC. Prior to that, there was a few that played around with the economy, and more importantly, probably played around with the share market more than anything. I did post something today that was very interesting on our Solvere Connect Facebook page. So if you're not on that, just go and request to join that. If you're not a Facebook user, then sorry, I can send you that article in any case. But it talked about in every downturn that we've had, or the last 4 or 5 that we've had, which averages out at about one every 8 to 10 years for reference, but property was very rarely impacted through those times. And personally, I made some commentary a few weeks ago that were along those lines. I don't think there'll be a dramatic effect on property, but I think the big indicator for me is unemployment. So coming into this health epidemic, we were around about 5.1, I think, % unemployment around the country, which is pretty solid, really. Fast forward to now, I haven't heard any latest stats on what it's at, but I think if we can keep it under double digits, under 10%, I think we'll be doing pretty well. That will avoid too many catastrophes in the property space. If there is some massive bargains out there, I think it'll be in undesirable areas or one-horse towns that probably you don't want to invest in anyway. So keeping a track of unemployment will be the true determinant, I believe, in where this is headed, and then how quickly it recovers back out of it. The 3 sectors, or the 3 main sectors, haven't been affected through this, which gives me comfort. So education, healthcare and construction are all business as normal. Now, obviously, healthcare has been affected in the sense that their workload's massive because of the health crisis, but those 3 industries are still earning income, which is a lot of the workforce, right? So that gives us comfort through this period. Obviously, there's a lot of other industries that have been affected, but they're the three main ones to monitor around the country. So while they're still going, it props up a lot of the country's wealth. As I said, property holds up in downturns of the past. So historically, that's what we can go by. But if we look at today, before coming into it, interest rates are at the lowest they've ever been, and maybe ever will be. There's fundamentally an undersupply of property around the country. Again, I mentioned today, Sydney is tracking at about 10,000 properties per year that it needs to catch up by. So that's a lot of properties. So around the country, there's up to 50,000 properties that need to be built, which aren't being built, basically. So that tells us that it's just really a case of identifying where there is that opportunity and looking at the supply and demand ratios going forward. And then the third part of it, which consolidates my argument, is coming out of this, I think a lot of people will tread very carefully and still have a little bit of fear and emotion around what's just happened unexpectedly. So that may mean they sit on the fence for the next 6 months, 12 months, 5 years, 10 years in some people's cases. So that gives more opportunity for us as potential buyers going forward. For those that have got property already, it's a case-by-case basis in terms of vacancy, and government, I think, have put out a pretty good stimulus package for everyone to ensure that we all get through this. But as landlords, I think it's been quite a reasonable situation for us to get ourselves through in regards to that. So that's my commentary on the state of affairs at the moment. We've got a question, Rebecca, on mortgages. How conservative do you expect the banks to be in the coming months? Living overseas, already more challenging for me to get approval, but I can imagine it's going to be more difficult than ever now. Any thoughts on mortgage approvals? Well, I do know one thing, Rebecca. The time frames in the banks at the moment have been extended because of how busy they are with everything. So time frames, don't expect them to be breaking any records. Look, I can't see there being I think APRA and the conditions they applied 18 months ago, or however long it was much more of a tightening effect than this will have on them. The banks are going to make money out of this because of people freezing their mortgage and things like that. So I don't think I would see a massive change in that space. Obviously, overseas is always forever changing with that, and it obviously has been tightened in the last couple of years because of a lot of Chinese investors. But I think going forward, I can't see a lot on the ground here that's going to change dramatically. Tara's saying, we're trying to obtain landlord's insurance for a new investment property it will take possession of. However, since the government introduced the moratorium last week, our insurance broker advised that now it's very hard to obtain insurance for unpaid tenant rent. What are your thoughts and advice on this? Do you have any companies you recommend? Yes, unfortunately, Tara, it's come at an inconvenient time as a landlord in terms of insurance. Most policies going into this did have a rent default, still has a rent default purpose, where in the event like this you could claim some loss of rent, or not loss of rent, but reduction in rent or whatever it may be. Now insurance companies have quickly acted to say, well, any new policies being taken up, there'll be an exemption on something like this pandemic. So I haven't got too many answers for you in that respect. I would just keep knocking down doors. Make sure you get landlord's insurance. It may not have a rent default in it, but you need to have landlord's insurance some way, shape or form. So keep knocking doors down to get that policy. It may have some exclusions as a result of what's going on, but that's unfortunately the situation we are in. Okay, so yes, next question. In researching for next purchase, what changes would you make to key factors in researching, if any, thinking that historical figures may be less relevant with the current future dynamics? Yes and no, Rebecca. I think historical figures are still a good indicator, but I think, and I talk about the top 30 cities by population. I think they're going to stand up even more than they have ever done because of this. In signs of, or in times of weakness, it's the vulnerable that don't survive, and the same goes with property markets. I think if there's declining population, it'll even be more evident now, because if people have lost their job, they may want now move out of that area and into areas that have more diverse range of employment. So I think the good, strong areas will still stack up. Will we go and expect a bargain in 6 months' time, 12 months' time? Personally, I don't think so. And if it is a bargain, it's probably a bargain for a reason. I don't currently think a lot will change. They may make a mug of me for thinking that, but yeah, I think what may change in the real estate space is the way we transact. So there may be less people inclined to go to an auction. There may be less auctions being run, which I think as a potential buyer, that is fantastic. I don't personally like auctions. They're very weighted towards a vendor, and it's too emotional with the buying process. So yeah, I think the less auctions, the better. And now you see the auction clearance rates are really not a strong indicator, because you've got so many private sales being completed. So yeah, hopefully that's a sign of things to come there. Another question is, Andy, how long do you expect it will take for any effect in terms of property values from the virus to filter through to the property market, or is it something already happening and just not widely reported? Yeah, good question. I think any statistics have anywhere between a 1 to 3 month lag. So I think it will be sort of June before we get to see what's happened. One thing you can keep an eye on is auction clearance rates, but also how many properties have sold, and what's happening with median prices. Now, the median prices are more of a 3 month look, so that's where you look at June. But weekend by weekend, you can see your clearance rates and who's buying and how many are out there. I think there's definitely less properties being listed, and I also think there's less buyers out there. So I think one's evening out the other. I think it probably needs a good 12 months before we can look back and say, yeah, the market dipped 5%. And it's really fitting that we're talking about long-term wealth plan tonight, because if we bought now versus 12 months' time or 2 years' time, we're playing a speculative game to try and pick the bottom of the market or a certain part of the market because of the health epidemic. I don't think it's a reason to hold off buying if we had a strategy to buy in the first place, given that we've got to look at the long-term outcome. That's my personal thoughts on that. Look at Sydney. The naysayers are out there all the time. If you take a look at Sydney's market to end of 2017, everyone was saying it's going to drop 15 to 20%. It's overpriced. It's an overheated market. Fast forward 2 years, well, it dropped about 5%, and then it's recovered to be 5 to 10% up on what it was in 2017. So I don't. Yeah, if that's the case in Sydney back then, I can't see a massive change this time around. Next question: do you anticipate that the current situation will keep first home owner builders in the rental cycle for longer? Is that first homeowner builders or buyers? I'm presuming it's buyers. I think first home buyers will have a good opportunity to get into the market now, but there's an asterisk next to that comment, and I would think that asterisk is some first home buyers out there might be freaking out a little, thinking, oh, this is all a bit scary for me because I haven't dipped my toes in the water before, so I'm maybe going to hold off. If they're an aggressive first home buyer that's itching to get into the market but just needs a door opening, then this may be the time for them to do that because there's less buyers out there. So I don't think it's a downside for a first home buyer. I would say it's actually a positive because there's less competition out there. So yeah, that's my 2 cents worth there, Tara. Good questions. But as I said, there's a few different forums that we can I share information. One is obviously our Solvere Connect Facebook, My Millennial Money podcasts that are weekly. There's My Millennial Property as well. But obviously the Solvere Academy, you guys have all got access to, so just making sure you absorb yourself in that, especially in some downtime, and just reading, I suppose, information that's going to be relevant and not full of propaganda. All right, so let's look at some long-term wealth plan. So first of all, I wanted to just share with you a screen, this one here. Okay, hopefully you can all see that. So that is our goal and habit setting guide, which you all have a copy of. Now, it has been updated to include some habits. So, oh, that's the wrong one. Let me get out of that. Let's have another go, will we? Bear with me. Was here a minute ago. All right, here we go. Okay. Where the hell's it gone now? All right. Okay. Wrong one again. Let me come back to it. Apologies. Technology is having its fun with me tonight. All right. I'll send you a new property analyzer calculator that we've got, which allows you, and if you can see at the bottom of this, there we go, you'll see down the bottom here, we've got an overview, a summary report, which is new, and then some P1 financials and a P1 report. Now, in the property analyzer calculator that you guys have got, you put in the financials, and then it spits out the numbers in the report, okay? So this is no different. You can see the report that looks like that, but the bonus is now you can then go to Property 2 and Property 2 report. You can then go to and put your details in for Property 3 report, and then you can go to Property 4 and Property 4 report, and then Property 5 and Property 5 report. Right, so you can put 5 properties into this calculator, and then it gives you an overview at the front, which takes into account all 5 properties in the one screen, which is pretty cool, and also gives you a summary of what your total portfolio is doing and how it's tracking from a cash perspective, right? And then you can put in different growth rates. So pretty excited about that and what it can do for you to gain some knowledge around your whole situation. We're still getting some further upgrades to it as well, but I'm happy to send that out to you guys to have some fun with, and just really there's two ways you can use it. If you've got multiple properties, you can put them in now, including your owner-occupier and your investment property. And the other way to use it is, all right, well, I haven't got any properties yet, or I've got one property, but I want to have 4. So you can forecast by putting in additional properties into these, into P1, P2, P3, etc. And then you can forecast what the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years looks like. Okay, so yeah, pretty cool. We put a bit of work in to make sure that that's sort of a bit more advanced than the current property analyzer does, but it's now a one-stop shop where you can still analyze future purchases, but you can also analyze your property portfolio in the one space. Yeah, hopefully you're excited about it as I am. So when setting a long-term wealth plan, the main thing is, well, 3 things. We need to have some goals and some time frames around them. So the goals and the time frames, when we're setting them for long-term wealth, we need to have a dollar figure around it. So what is it that we want to achieve in what sort of time frames? We then also need to have an understanding of, if we want 4 properties in 10 years, for example, how are we going to go about that? Now, it's great to say I want 4 properties in 10 years, but A, how am I going to do that with my deposits and lending? And B, how am I going to, or what does that mean for me in terms of total wealth, right? So if we did an exercise that said, and I actually did today with one client, where we said, okay, the client wants 4 properties in 10 years, okay? Now, we need to align that 4 properties in 10 years with the goals and also the ability to save deposits or create deposits every basically 2 to 2.5 years, right? So if I just quickly jump on to a whiteboard here, this is me going right out of control with technology, and I'll say text, and we say, right, we want 4 in 10 years. Our first property is going to be 500k. Our second property, that's property number 1. Property number 2 is going to be also 500k. And their example today was their principal place of residence is going to cost them around 700k. And then their 4th property, as a ballpark, was another 500. So I'll get to their cash flow in a moment, but what we need is deposits. We're assuming a 10% deposit plus stamps. So in that case, we need 75. We need another 75k for property 2. Now, this is actually their owner-occupier, so we don't want to be paying lender's mortgage insurance, I don't think. So we want to put in 20% deposit, so that gives us, it means we need 140 plus another maybe 30 to 40, let's call 40 in stamps, depending on which state you're in, and then another 75 for our 4th property. So there's our 4 in 10. Now, total-wise, that gives us the required deposits of how much? 290, 330,000. So we look at our goals and say our goal is 100k per annum of passive income, as an example, and my target is 10 years. Yep, 10 years to get this done, so it allows me to give my family or myself passive income, or create an extra 100 grand into my life in the next 10 years. The next period after I've created those that property portfolio. Right now, I might keep investing after that time, but the foundations of the next 10 years is the key here. Okay, so savings, we worked out that this couple can save 30 grand per annum. Okay, so over 10 years, if they continue doing what they're doing, they're going to save themselves $300,000, right? So you look at those numbers and say, righto, we need 330k, we're going to save 300 if we continue to do what we're doing. Now the variables are, I might get married, I might want to travel to France, I might want to buy a new car, all those sort of things. So all the discretional spending needs to be taken into account to impact this goal of 4 properties in 10 years, right? But we'll talk about those in a moment. So based on their savings goal, they're pretty much close enough to completing this goal. Should they invest at that 500k mark or find properties around that 500k mark through that time, and their principal place of residence costs them around 700k. Now, the order that they purchase those properties in will vary based on their life at that time, i.e. want to have kids, okay, so we buy our own home a bit earlier, or the market says we should be buying into it now rather than wait another 5 years, etc., etc. So I look at the total asset value here, and for those who have already worked that out in their head, we know we've got a total portfolio of $2.2 million, right? So I've added up the 500s and the principal place here. Now this is assuming that there's no assets prior to this, okay? Now if you're doing this exercise, you can say, well, I come into it with 1 property already, or my savings goal is higher or lower, or I want a more aggressive portfolio, or I want a more conservative portfolio, whatever it may be. Everyone's situation is different, but I'm just giving the example. So the total asset value is 2.2 million. Now we said today that we would assume, and I can't see the comments for the moment, so I'll have to go back to that in a moment to see if you've got any questions around this, but assuming a 5% capital growth rate per annum, okay? So if we're assuming a 5% or planning for a 5% capital growth rate, per annum, our portfolio is growing at $110,000, okay? Now, have we got access to pull that 110 and go and live happily ever after? No, it's just simply growing our overall wealth for the future, okay? Also take into account that alongside of this, we are paying down our principal place of residence, we're reducing our tax potentially through investing, and we've also got super working for us alongside, okay? So there's a few other variables that are going to assist us with our overall wealth plan, or creating that wealth bucket with enough wealth magnets in it to do its thing. Now you could shape this however which way you want in terms of properties and number of properties, but also the full-on value of your portfolio. In some ways, I think the number of properties is irrelevant. It's how they're performing for you, okay? So that's a quick back of the postcard scenario of what a long-term wealth plan may look like. So the key is knowing, righto, in 10 years, this is what we want. If we get 3 out of 4 in 10 years, then we're better off than not setting a target at all. We've got a goal. We're assuming a reasonable conservative capital growth rate, and that should increase our wealth by that amount per annum for the next years that we own those properties outright. Now, it's also assuming that there's no growth rate. We're not pulling any equity out of those 4 properties to buy the next property, right? So I would be thinking that in 10 years' time, there'd be some equity in property number 1 to be able to use as a deposit for another property, or to do some things with from a lifestyle perspective if you chose to, or whatever it is that floats your boat. Okay. Okay, so is anyone, I'm just going to stop sharing for now. Questions? Okay, Rebecca, perhaps I'm being a bit dense. No, you're not. But how is the total needed 330? Was my maths wrong, was it? 75, 152, 70. Was I 75 short, was I? Okay, so that's, let me go back to my, no, I might have taken it off there. 150, 225, 360, what am I? How's my maths going? 150, 225, 380, 420. Yeah, you're right, Rebecca. Sorry. So, let's change that around. So, yeah, you would need, on that basis, you would need to have, let me just edit that. You would need to have some deposit funds through equity that would assist with the last purchase, okay? So your 3 in 10 years would be worked, and then the 4th one would be equity would be used for that, okay? Now, another thing we spoke about also was the ability to pay down your principal place of residence through that time if you chose to have a principal place of residence, right? So we want to make sure that we're actually paying down bad debt all the way through and not increasing any further debt. From a bad debt perspective, it's all good debt, right? So with the view that in a 10 to 12 year period, we might have no bad debt, all good debt, and continue to be saving money thereon after. Okay. Yeah, apologies for the maths hiccup there. Yeah, so the theory is understood, equity too, so that works. Okay, cool. Has anyone got any questions, observations? Do you want me to run some different scenarios on it? It's a really basic one to work with there. But the key is understanding that you've got a long-term goal and a time frame and a deposit amounts required, but you need to know your savings plan. This is why I put so much emphasis on knowing how much we can save, is because worst case, I didn't bank on any capital growth or very little capital growth in that 10-year period. If it comes along, which I presume it will, but I'm not banking on it, we know that we're covered because we've got savings and it's just a bonus on top of that. Okay, where most people fall down is they expect capital growth in the next year or 2 years to then pull equity out to then put it into their second purchase and disrespect their savings amount or their savings ability and just continue upgrading their car and discretionary spending left, right and centre. So yeah, there's some key methods there that need to be consistent right throughout in order to get the results. That's for sure. So yeah, keep your capital growth estimates low, but it's a long-term game that needs to be adhered to. The goalposts are going to change along the way, but the key question that came out of today's meeting was, well, when do we buy our own home? Because we know that if we buy our own home, we're going to have a larger mortgage, which is going to limit our savings, right? So instead of saving 30 grand a year, we might now only be saving 20 grand a year because we've got a mortgage. Very good point. So I think it's meeting halfway with lifestyle and financial to say, well, can we get our own mortgage in 5 years? By that time, we've got ourselves 2 investment properties, and then continue to invest once some equity is created in the mortgage or in the principal place of residence. All right. Any questions on that before we finish up on that? Nope. Nope. Nothing there. Okay. Is there anything else that you want me to talk about there in respect to long-term wealth plan, how it can play out, or anything else that's relevant that you want to get off your chest? The key thing I also want to add in there with your lending, and Rebecca, you sort of talked about it before, was lending conditions change from time to time, is when you're setting a strategy for the long term, you really do need to have that long term view in mind, because it's very easy to think, I just want to target capital growth and not worry too much about rental yield. But when we're looking at that second, third, or fourth property, the banks treat those rental properties sometimes in the wrong manner. And what I mean by that is they may only take into account 80% of the rent. Even though the property might be costing you very little to hold, if they're only taking into account 80% of the rent, that impacts your servicing quite considerably if you've got 3 of those properties. So putting an emphasis on yield in the early days makes it a bit easier down the track. Okay, very hard to teach someone that when they're only searching for capital growth and go in with their first property at a 3.5% gross yield, only to find that the bank's tied them in knots and they can't have any more lending capabilities unless they increase their income, which is very hard in a lot of cases, or they need to reduce their expenses, which obviously has a ceiling as well. There's only so much they can reduce it by because the banks puts a standard living expense across them anyway. So yeah, they're hamstrung really, and unless their rental yield increases, or they sell the property and get into something that's got a high yield. All right, so keep that in mind when we want to be getting capital growth, which obviously capital growth will always outspeed your savings, but in search for that, keep your eye on the rental yield calculator as well. Yeah, cool. Has that been of benefit, or was that just a load of scribble that sort of meant nothing to you? I think it's the action step is to go away and look at what it means to you, maybe some time frames, and definitely some what our savings plan will enable us to do. Doesn't mean you have to do it, but also looking at what you want over the next 8 to 10 years and jotting that down. That goal and habit setting guide that I was trying to get up for you actually has the habits written into it now, so you can put in your habits to ensure that our goals remain on track. Now, I've got a lot of you to do that anyway. along the way, but having it there and looking at it each week definitely keeps you motivated in respect to that. Okay, anything else before we finish up tonight? How's everyone surviving in lockdown? We're getting there. We're not tearing hair out, especially if you're homeschooling.
I think I'll be bald soon. I'm tearing my hair out. I definitely am tearing my hair out.
You are tearing it out.
For sure.
Craig says nothing's changed on the farm. Does that mean he just jumps on the tractor when the kids are screaming? Left for Tara to do it all. Yeah, it's definitely a strange situation that everyone's going through. From a positive point of view, I honestly think it's made us very much more grounded. Now, obviously, if our jobs have been affected, it's a different conversation. But I think it's made us a lot more relaxed and grounded. I know from our family point of view, we were off to sport 3 or 4 nights a week with our kids, and the weekends were the same, and it was just ramping up into winter sport. So it was full on. Now it's like we've got our evenings back, and it seems a lot more relaxed at home. The school life is very different. But yeah, we're getting to enjoy the simple things and getting to know each other a lot better than we probably would have if we were rushing from A to B every second minute.
You're absolutely right. Things have slowed down, haven't they? It's calmer.
Yeah. There's always a positive out of some negative time, isn't there? All right, very good. Well, thanks for taking the time to tune in. If we want to go offline with that and have a one-on-one session and scalp that out a bit more for you personally, just sing out and we'll lock a time in. Otherwise, take care with your families and we'll chat soon.
Thanks so much, John. That's brilliant.
Thank you, guys.
Talk soon. Bye.
Bye.